So much for joining us. This is going to be a wonderful experience for us all. And I would now like to invite John to begin the video presentation. Thank you.
UPF had its inaugural assembly on September 12, 2005 at the Lincoln Center in New York City. Reverend Sun Myung Moon delivered the keynote address.
In closing, I ask you to devote your best efforts for the development and the success of the Universal Peace Federation. Thank you. Thank you.
After UPF was founded, there was a series of world tours where the message of UPF was taken literally to every corner of the world.
That it is time for all nations and religions to break down their barriers. Through this, the era of one family under God will arrive and last forever.
UPF is God's cherished hope. The founders spoke repeatedly of an international peace highway connecting the world from Santiago, Chile to London, across the Bering Strait, what has come to be known as the Peace Road, and a vision for a renewed United Nations. UPF emerged on the foundation of decades of programs initiated by its founders and carried out in all parts of the world. Its growth and development over the past 15 years has been dramatic, if not miraculous, owing in large part to the work of tens of thousands of ambassadors for peace, peace activists, and volunteers who draw from all nationalities, religions, ethnicities, cultures, and traditions, bound together by a vision of peace, a vision of humanity as one global family under one God. The range of programs over the years has been both broad and expansive, from character education to strengthening the family, from conflict prevention to conflict resolution, from poverty reduction to environmental stewardship, from interfaith dialogue to youth service initiatives, from support of the United Nations to partnerships with the African Union, and a wide range of international organizations and NGOs. UPF has a global, multinational, multi-faith network of more than 100,000 ambassadors for peace who support and contribute to the mission and works of UPF. UPF's highest award, the Leadership and Good Governance Award, has been given to distinguished leaders the world over. The World Summit Series is UPF's flagship program involving the highest level of leaders from around the globe, including current and former heads of state and government, to address the critical challenges facing humanity.
Very appropriate that we are here on the 100th anniversary of Reverend Moon's birth, because out of the devastation of World War II and the Korean War, he and his bride found the courage to dream that they could achieve something. And it is amazing what they have created together.
Programs have been successfully held in Korea, the USA, Senegal, South Africa, Nepal, Cambodia, and other nations. The most recent structural innovation within UPF has been the creation of a set of associations dedicated to collaboration among leaders from various fields. These pillar associations are: the International Summit Council for Peace was initiated by UPF co-founder Dr. Hak Jahan Moon in 2019 on the occasion of World Summit 2019 in Seoul, Korea. ISCP is an international network of current and former heads of state and government. The International Association of First Ladies, IAFLP, a project of the ISCP, affirms and uplifts the unique role of First Ladies in contributing to peace and development. IAFLP brings together current and former First Ladies from throughout the world, drawing upon their experience and wisdom as women leaders and as role models who serve their countries in significant ways. The International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, IAPP, is a worldwide association of parliamentarians which provides a forum to bring their experience and wisdom to bear in the search for solutions to our world's problems. UPF maintains that any successful strategy for peace must take into account the spiritual dimension of our human identity, experience, and interactions. Based on this worldview, UPF initiated the Interreligious Association for Peace and Development, IAPD. The International Media Association for Peace, IMAP, represents a worldwide professional network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media. IMAP recognizes the vital role that journalists play in providing objective reporting to foster an informed citizenship. The International Association of Academicians for Peace, IAAP, is a global interdisciplinary academic initiative aimed at contributing toward the realization of a world of lasting peace. IAAP is dedicated to building professional networks for academicians to foster a world of peace. The International Association for Peace and Economic Development, IAED, affirms the role of businesses, business leaders, and investors to make the world a better place. In early 2020, UPF convened a Rally of Hope featuring dignitaries including Pastor Paula White, Cambodia Head of State His Excellency Hun Sen, President Macky Sall of Senegal, former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, former US Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and many others.
I believe that the Universal Peace Federation and its broad set of partnerships in the realms of politics, religion, academia, media, economy, arts, women and youth serve as a good model. I believe the Universal Peace Federation will become a cornerstone to build lasting peace around the world and the heavenly unified Korea based on interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values.
Celebrating 15 years, UPF will continue to grow through service, dialogue, and collaboration, guided by its spiritual and moral vision of one family under God.
Thank you.
World peace has never been easy. The path to peace in a male-dominated world has always been a difficult battle, and the biggest victims have been children, and women. In 1992, Women's Federation for World Peace took a historic step on the path towards world peace and towards changing the world through maternal love.
세계 평화 여성 연합 운동은 여성만을 위한 운동이 아닙니다. 이상적 가정들이 모여서 이상적인 국가, 이상적인 세계를 이루게 되는 것입니다.
WFWP has partnered with the United Nations, governments, and civil society in all parts of the world. From 1992, in 119 countries, Women's Federation for World Peace members have organized programs aimed at transforming this world into a world of peace. We have provided literacy, vocational, and public health education to foster women's independence. We have carried out family values and sex education programs, seminars on marriage, education for parents, and family counseling to build peaceful families. We have held programs for women, including leadership education, peace conferences, and peace academies to develop women's leadership. And we have organized sisterhood ceremonies to promote reconciliation and heal historical resentment and hatred. And thanks to the partnerships with governments and numerous organizations, these efforts have brought true progress. More than 35,000 women and girls received education that helped them to become financially independent. More than 327,000 women and girls received education for building peaceful families. More than 360,000 women and girls received leadership training to empower and elevate their status in society. And more than 160,000 women have participated in sisterhood ceremonies to reconcile historical resentment and hatred. Women's rights have greatly improved over the past 30 years, but even where there has been progress, it is not enough, and tremendous challenges still remain in many, many countries. COVID-19 reveals huge global inequalities. Wars and conflicts continue, and the threat of climate change is still getting worse. Women and girls are the most vulnerable in these crises. But women have special qualities of empathy, caring, solidarity, and love. With these qualities, women and girls must take a bold step forward to take on the unfinished business of creating a lasting world of peace. Historically, world peace has never come easy, but for 30 years, through the maternal love of women, we have worked to create a more peaceful world and will continue to do so until peace can be and is a reality for all.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a wonderful introduction. Let's give a big round of applause. I would also like to really acknowledge all the ambassadors for peace currently present and the members of Women's Federation, Universal Peace Federation and their associates. Thank you everyone for joining here. I would now like to welcome Dr. John Bellavance to give the opening address from Universal Peace Federation on the topic of building peace-building leadership skills in the global village. So for those of you who may not be so familiar with Dr. John, he has a PhD in values education from Monash University, focusing on moral psychology and the use of technology. John is an information technology educator, writer, and a public speaker. He is also the Oceania coordinator and for the International Association of Academicians for Peace and National Vice President of UPF Australia. So please give him a big warm welcome as he shares with us now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you all for giving up your time to be here and sharing the UN Day of Peace with us. I'd like to really start with a story, a personal story. Some years ago, my wife and I decided to buy a pool table. We have 4 sons, and we bought this pool table, and the boys were excited, and away we went. And, you know, one day back at school, coming back from work, my son said to me, "Chris, Dad, can we play pool together?" And I said, "Sure, Chris, but I'm so tired. How about tomorrow?" And being a good son, he said, "You know, Dad, that's okay." And then the next day came along, and of course he asked me, "Dad, can we play pool now?" And I said, "Chris, I'm so tired." And he looked at me a bit sad, but because he loves me, he said, "That's okay, Dad." I said, "Well, how about on the weekend?" That was a very powerful lesson for me, and it's really gives you a background as to what I want to share today. And that is that love takes discipline, and it takes discipline between mind and body. I immediately realized with that experience where the front line of peace really lies, and that is in my capacity to love. We are very knowledgeable as a human family. Our level of intelligence is great, but in some way we're still teenagers when it comes to our capacity to love. And so to me, I realized very quickly that, you know, the struggle between mind and body is the front line, or the beginning point, if you like, of peace building, because your body has desires, or it has physical limitations, but our mind must be able to overcome those limitations and to be able to love. So let me begin by sharing my screen and presenting with you today my presentation. So what I'd like to do is, because we have ambassadors for peace here, I really want to share with you what are the peace building principles of the federations that are here, including Women's Federation and so on. So I just want to share with you this morning, we were in a 3-hour session just to give you an understanding of the level in which Universal Peace Federation operates at. And that is that right away, you could see here, you see Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the left and my left, and Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, live from Washington. I was with a group of about 200 people in the world discussing peace on the Korean Peninsula. It was an amazing experience, and it showed we had speakers from Japan, from Korea, from the United States, all at the same time having this Zoom session. So what I want to talk about today are universal values, interdependence, and mutual prosperity. And in a sense, it is our moral purpose. Every organization or any way that we can change this world must be driven by values and by moral purpose. So my reflections today are based on, you know, my own ideas, but also they're based on some of the core peace-building principles of our founders. So as we move beyond the pandemic, our collective efforts to promote a vision of peace on the United Nations International Day of Peace are all the more necessary. Lasting peace is secured not only through laws, but backed by government, by a rising awareness of our universal solidarity as one human family, brothers and sisters who share a common and spiritual and moral heritage. You know, one could say that we just have to get the right policies and implement them, and peace sustainable development can be achieved. However, yes, the right policies are important, but if leaders do not have the right motivation or will, all the policies, initiatives in the world will not do. So we do face great challenges: confusion of values, moral corruption, addiction, terrorism, racial discrimination, unequal distribution of wealth, violation of human rights, war, genocide. These are actually all inevitable consequences of our selfishness and of self-centered materialism, which is so prevalent in our world today. So what is the key problem? If there's a core loss of values, and this is a serious issue causing materialism, and the loss of values is leading us to use other human beings for our own sake. We're destroying our relationship between parents and children, between siblings, husband and wife. Additionally, the decline of moral and spiritual values has led to psychological and spiritual exhaustion. Buddha used the metaphor of the moth drawn to perish in a lamp to represent people's attraction to the vanities and materialism of this world. So clearly we all know, you folks that come here today are people that understand that we must live for something bigger than ourselves. Individualism is good, but selfish individualism is a trap. It divides people by having them center on themselves. And people are often forgetting and disregarding the values that sustain their well-being, causing them to lose themselves and lose their soul. So one of the core values of our federation is human responsibility. This has two sides. That is that we broke it, we need to fix it, which means we are responsible as human beings. So we cannot expect God to fix the problems that we have caused. However, we must do our sincere best. And we believe that if we do our sincere best, God will be with us and we can move forward. So what do we fix? Many things, of course, but it really starts with universal values. In the global village, we need shared values. Okay, so then the question has to be, what is the basis for universal values? And here's one possible definition, and that is the ethics of love. Ethics of love forms the foundation for shared values across time and culture. First, love within the family, you could say, has been the most unchanging and universal value in human history. For example, one could say that parental love for a child has been the most altruistic and unchanging value. Second, values centered on love are broader and more enduring than value systems that focus on narrow ideologies and beliefs and moral mandates. Love is bigger than rules. Just ask a parent. The reason for this is that moral imperatives do not always satisfy the dictates of love. Tolerance is an important value in our Western culture, and it is important. But willingness to tolerate the existence of opinions or behaviors that one disagrees with does not foster the willingness to understand others. Care for others forms the basis to solve global issues. We need to learn to love each other, to care. Third, love serves the public good, the good of others. Altruism, justice, equality, and impartiality have been at the forefront of human morality for millennia. So acts of altruism are considered by all cultures as the highest value. Love is associated with the ethics of reciprocity, the golden rule. And fourth, rationality and moral rules is not enough. It's not enough for me or for you to act out morally. Emotional intelligence has taught us that the best decisions and behaviors combine the rational mind and the emotional mind. We may know something is right, but love and emotion add the further motivation to act rightly. Love and deep sense of emotion of what is right is the primary motive for us to act in the best interest of another person, not just the rational mind. So you must have to we just have to be a human being, a parent, a spouse, a friend, to know that love is the basis standard of values. We are accountable to each other based on the ethics of love. The second important dimension to our federation is that we need a holistic approach to peace in the global village. Reason, theism, humanism, materialism must not be separate. Secular humanism must not ignore spiritual values, however, and self-centered materialism must be controlled. I'm sure some of our speakers will speak about this today. That means guided by higher ideals. And spiritual values must be guided by reason. The founder said, I do not believe the claims made by theism, humanism, and materialism have been in irreconcilable conflict with one another. Rather, I think they have been partial, not yet mature expressions of one principle. Hence, in the global village, another core value of our principles is that universal values advance the common understanding between people of the world. In the global village, we need to find values that we can share so that we can move forward. So hence, as peace builders, we find and promote these shared values, and they have their source in morality, in faith traditions, in philosophy, and these have underpinned our civilizations. We promote and foster one family, where people embrace beyond ethnicity, race, religion, ideological and political persuasions. We promote headwing. The political left and right must work together. Another core principle is peace within ourselves. That is between mind and body. I started off with that story, that to love, we need to master ourselves. It takes discipline to love others. The UNESCO Constitution said in 1945 that since the wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Who can be at peace in strife, says the ancient religion of Taoism. And peace is calm, the calm of impulses in Buddhism. Which brings us to the conscience. The human conscience has driven peace throughout the centuries. Because in the end, some would say that we have a DNA and that our DNA is fundamentally good. Some would argue that that's very idealistic. But our conscience seeks goodness. Human beings inherently tend to avoid evil and seek goodness. However, the body, as I explained, tends to rebel against the conscience. So in my conscience, I felt the second time when my son asked me, Dad, can you play pool with me? I felt in my conscience that my body was telling me, no, look after yourself. But my conscience was telling me, no, look after your son. The body seeks its own comfort and pursues impulsive and instinctive desires. And from this point of view, conflict and struggle arises within me. Those who strive for goodness and higher ideals are aware of this and are confronted with this problem within their own lives. So therefore, our founder has often said that our job as ambassadors for peace, number one, is to reach for and restore our autonomy, our dignity, and our value as children of God. The purpose of religion, philosophy, ethics, psychology, and education has been to raise consciousness from self-serving, impulse-driven human beings to become other-centered human beings that serve others. And for those who are spiritually inclined, divine human beings. So people may be living in comfort today, yet they may be caught in the bondage of runaway desires, of addictions, and bad relationships. And because of our dysfunctional nature, we may find ourselves stuck behind walls that we have created for ourselves. And we must break down these walls between our mind and body, between our conscience and our behaviors, between husband and wife, in families, tribes, nations, religions. The problem is that self-interest has divided us as a human family and has divided nations. So the core principle for peace with others is to live for the sake of others. Martin Luther King Jr. said, life's most persistent and urgent question, yes, persistent and urgent question is, what am I doing for others? This is urgent. Living for the sake of others is when we say, what is love? It means that we live for the sake of another, that we feel responsible for others. Most people seek pleasure in their lifetime. The challenge is to elevate our own hearts and love for others. Otherwise, it's easy to settle in the easier option of looking after ourselves. So what is love? Is to live for others. Love always seeks the higher ideal, to live beyond oneself. Have you ever thought about that? I'm not talking about self-centered love here. I'm talking about authentic love. And it's sad that people live by themselves alone. So therefore, authentic love and dysfunctional love have major implications for our lives and how we govern this world, because goodness is living for others. And this is the core of ethics. Evil, on the other hand, is to live for one's sake at the expense of others, to expect others to live for us. And love binds us to each other. What are the benefits of living for others? And I'm going to conclude now. They're immense. I cannot tell you the number of times that these words, living for the sake of others, have saved me. And what I mean of saved me is saved me from a life that is ordinary, or a life that is just, just looking after myself. I have had periods in my life where I was actually, cynical. But then I came back to the concept, that Dr. King talked about. Nelson Mandela said, we have to live for others. Great people have always advocated this. The number of times that has saved me is it allowed me to love my family, my wife, the people around me, because it changed the focus of my mindset from me to others. Now you might say, oh, you're going to lose there, John. I never lost, because by living for the sake of others, I found myself. By living selfishly, we lose ourselves. When we enter into a relationship, we begin to understand actually who we are. For those who are spiritually inclined, when we live for others, we are reaching the essence of God. Mind and body are united when love is placed at the center of our lives. While seeking love, we must forget the self. While seeking to liberate others, we are liberated. While we work, to overcome our sorrows and challenges. Let me conclude. The core principles of this federation is that the individual lives for the sake of the family. Families should contribute to the community. Community gives strength to the nation, and nations exist for the world. Thank you.
Amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. John. That was very good. I saw some people there, I think it was Louise, saying that, can we each have a copy of that presentation? And my heart is agreeing with her. I'd really like to go over that, because that has had a lot of good words in there. However, we will continue on and hear from our first keynote address, Professor Neelakanta Radhakrishnan, I hope I got that correct. I was practicing beforehand. So the topic of Professor Radhakrishna's speech will be the UN and global peace, the challenges ahead. So to introduce a little bit about Professor Radhakrishnan is that he is the chairman of the Indian Council of Gandhian Studies from New Delhi, and the founder of Gandhi Media Foundation and General Convener, the Gandhi Peace Mission 2015. Professor Nilakanta Radhakrishnan sums up his extraordinarily eventful life and achievements like this: a rare combination of intellectualism and activism. Professor Radhakrishnan is distinguished in several fields. He is an educator, an administrator, the founder of several educational institutions, the author of over 40 books, a journalist, a trainer of youth in non-violence, a theatre expert, an actor, a human rights activist, and a researcher of folk arts. Professor Radhakrishnan is an important source of inspiration to a number of innovative initiatives all over the world, especially in the field of training in non-violence. So please welcome up this extraordinary gentleman to speak for us now.
Namaskar. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever it be. Let me identify with greatness and gratitude Dr. John Bellavan, Professor Anup Saru, Molly Harris Orson, Linda Young, Shahid Yamin, Dr. Daniel Meadows, and very distinguished participants of today's conference on the UN. I would like to begin with what Mahatma Gandhi said about academicians and their role in the changing times. Gandhi said, academicians are builders of bridges of goodwill, hope, happiness, and messengers of future. I remembered Gandhi because at a time when we remember the great role the UN has been playing over the years, though there are skeptics and a lot of criticisms on the effectiveness of UN as a body promoting peace, justice, and many other values that we cherish, I would like to begin on a happy note, a note of optimism. That is, let us salute this great sentinel of a hope, a peace, and an agency striving for peace. Of course, there are quite a few questions that come up before us when we salute this great sentinel of hope and peace. Has it become, or has it emerged over the years as a parliament of humanity, as it was decided long ago, even from the days of its founding, is the first question that comes to my mind. Notwithstanding its failures, I still consider that it has played a big role in promoting a peace in this world. And critics and scholars believe that the biggest contribution of UN over the years was that it prevented a third world war effectively. That's the first point that comes to my mind when I reflect on what has the UN done to humanity. The second reflections that I would like to make today is, during the Golden Jubilee of UN, 185 members of the global nations made a very, very significant observation. Let me just invite your attention to that historic resolution at which the UN said, we are determined that the United Nations of the future will work with renewed vigor and effectiveness in promoting peace, development, equality and justice and understanding among the peoples of the world. Therefore, we are convinced that we will give to the 21st century a United Nations equipped, financed, and structured to serve the new century, a century of hope and happiness, financed, structured to serve effectively the peoples in whose name it was established. Friends, we cannot just dismiss it as just a declaration or a resolution, but then when we reflect 25 years later and ask ourselves to what extent the UN has succeeded in promoting these objectives and in furthering the resolve of the humanity, has it emerged? The second question is, has it served and promoted the cause of the UN emerging as a parliament of humanity? This is a major question, notwithstanding what the cynics, what the critics, or what the opponents would say. UN has served a purpose. This is the optimistic note that I would like to submit. While we should criticize, while we should look at where we have erred, should we not pick up the even the glimmer of hope that we can see and the major achievements of UN over the years? That is the next reflection that come to my mind. But then, where have we failed in making it effectively the voice of the collective voice of the humanity? Though UN has scored in many areas, in three major areas, the UN has awfully lagged behind, and if I use the expression, belied the hope of the humanity, I may be pardoned. The first point here is the founding fathers of the UN were the victorious nations, and the charter of UN and the collective action they took later were all the decisions of those victorious nations in the chartered in their own fashion, not even listening to the voice of others who were, I don't say that the defeated doesn't have a voice. In a democratic setup, in the collective conscience of humanity, we should assume that the voice of the victor and the vanquished are to be equally respected and sustained. It did not happen. I would like to point out, I hold the view that over the 7 decades of UN's existence, though there were several attempts made to improve its structure, we have not gone much ahead in this torturous exercise. The veto powers taken, not given, taken by the 5 powers in 21st century appear to be a retrograde step where 5 masters of the universe have divided among themselves as if the whole humanity and hold the humanity to ransom. This is not a democratic picture of the great human human body, international body, which is again a sentinel of hope to many of us. Similarly, they themselves decide as to who should implement and in which fashion the cherished dream of humanity to usher in an era of peace, promotion of values, about which John Bellawens very, very eloquently presented today. The moral principles have been kept to the background, and what we see is not even a glimmer, a tinge of what we believe, the return of the colonialism in the garb of neo-colonialism or whatever it is. Should we not release the UN from the clutches of these people who believe themselves and pretend themselves as the masters of the world? It has to become the collective voice of the humanity, where every nation, every nationality, every culture has an effective role to play. I don't understand, and I'm sorry, I don't undermine the great role of some of the organizations created by UN have done over these years. Many very, very laudable or very important achievements were shared in by UN agencies like FAO, WHO, UNESCO, UNICEF, UNCTAD, UNDP, ILO, UNIDO, and many other agencies. So instead of condemning lock, stock, and barrel at all what UN has achieved over the years, if the UN has to remain a few years hence as the voice of the collective humanity, number one, it has to emerge confidently, visibly, tangibly, and forcefully the parliament of the universe, humanity. Number two, the veto power of the 5 great nations have to be done away with. Number three, it has been the long and cherished dream and demand of the whole nation that the 15-member body of the Security Council has to be enlarged, accommodating the need for listening realistically the needs of the other nations to become representative on that body. Why do we hesitate? Why does the UN hesitate? But optimistically, there are signs of the masters of the world also realizing that time is changing, not too fast, and they have to be realistic in their approach. But how far this realism will sustain when arrogance of power, arrogance of money, and arrogance of weapons of mass destruction with which they hold the humanity to ransom? These are big questions the academic world has to get seized of. And I am happy that this assembly today being attended by over 100 representatives from different parts of the world is seized of this matter. through very many creative efforts. The videos rather that were screened before the MC presented today, the program details, and the first keynote address or the presidential address by Dr. John eloquently made clear that we are a determined body of academicians, peace activists, human rights activists, and people who are sensitive to the demands of women, who constitute more than half of the total population, that their voices are to be heard not as heard from the margins, but their voice and presentation have to become central to our collective effort for a better world, an equitable world, a world where justice of all kinds will prevail. And let me hope that today's international conference of the kind of which that you and I are attending will open up fresh areas of discussion, collective action, individual action, which will be definitely, which will have to be sustained. But then we have to go a long way. We have a long role in which UN has a great role. And I salute all those who are part of the UN bodies and the UN arrangement and the structures and agencies and within the UN and outside the UN. We are all playing, and we have to play a big role as we go ahead. Long march we have to, intellectual long march. We need to design, we have to sustain, and may the kind of discussions that will follow today be the harbingers of the change that we need at various levels to promote peace with everybody, peace for everybody, peace in society. May I wish you best of luck, and let me thank you. This is the first time that I join your forum, and I would certainly express my profound sense of gratitude to Dr. John as well as Professor Anup Sarup for inviting me to join you and present my views. I have left a small paper which will be available with Dr. John, who I think will circulate or make it available later. Thank you, and let us have a happy day, a peaceful day, and a peaceful future. Thank you. Namaskar. Jai Jagat, we say. Victory to the world. That is the Indian expression. Victory to the world. Jai Jagat.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Radhakrishnan. That was really inspiring to hear these kind of words. I think you have a lot of experience and a great deal of insight to be able to share with us all. So we will now have a 5-minute Q&A session. If any of you have questions you would like to pose to either Dr. Radhakrishnan or Dr. John, please type them out in the chat, and they can briefly and concisely answer those questions. Due to lack of any questions being typed and Pastor Nelson raising his hand, please, Pastor Nelson, would you like to give a short question or something? You have. There you go.
Yeah.
You're unmuted. Yeah.
Actually, I have not questions, just comments. Thank you for the board speakers, and I really like Dr. John's word, wall. So wall is very important in especially peace work, because we should remove all walls, because sometimes we are making walls of different type of in our religion, in our sections, in our community, and with wall we are making walls, and even we cannot see one another, and not we can hear one another. So if we remove the walls, that will be true peace. Thank you, Brother John. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor Nelson. Louise Karamaris had a good question there. I think possibly both speakers could give their 2 cents on this, but I will ask Dr. Radhakrishnan, how do you measure altruism? Professor? You are unmuted. You can just speak.
Okay, it was unmuted. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
I am sorry. I'm sorry, Dr. Daniel, I haven't heard you properly.
Oh, right. Was I muted? Oh, anyway, the question is, how do you measure or how could you measure altruism? So living for the sake of others, how could we measure this?
Well, the first is the dissolution of the kind of war, spiritual war, moral wars, physical wars, economic wars, and wars of all kinds, both visible and invisible, that imprison us, are to be demolished convincingly, forcibly, and their debris has to be removed from the surface as well as from our mind. So if we want any change, if we want any progress, all the walls that imprison us are to be removed once and for all. This has to be the collective effort of UN and maybe other agencies. And in this case, NGOs also have a great role. The role NGOs have been playing have not been appreciated convincingly or enough. We always talk about the improvements are shared in by organized or governmental or such other agencies, not of the civilian initiatives like the NGOs of various kinds, which have shared in remarkable changes and which have effectively and convincingly changed the rhythm and texture of our thinking and our living. So this has to, the desire for the change and the tool of relating this have to begin, just like the UNESCO has said there, since wars begin, you know that in the minds, it is there. The construction for peace are to begin. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. Very good. You know, that you remind me of a quote from William Blake, the English poet, talking about our mind-forged manacles. In our mind, we've already built these walls between each other, right? And we should take off these shackles that keep us prisoner.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we will now continue on. You can, after we have concluded our session, there will be time if you wish to ask either of these two speakers any more questions. There will be free time at the end to have these conversations. But for now, I would like to introduce the Master of Ceremonies for the second half of our program, Will Abdo, who is the Assistant Vice President of UPFA as well as the CEO of Web Trade Marketing Pty Ltd. So please give him a warm welcome as he leads us to the next session.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, for being with us on this special occasion of the UN International Day of Peace. And thank you, Dr. Bellavance and Professor Radhakrishnan for enlightening presentation. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our next distinguished keynote speaker, Molly Harris-Olsen, who is the CEO of Fairtrade Australia and New Zealand, leading a dynamic team in strengthening fair trade supply chains, growing revenue and blustering environmental economic sustainability practices throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Recognized for her 3 decades of leadership in sustainable development, Molly has convened, driven and contributed to numerous boards, business leadership and sustainability initiatives. She speaks widely to senior business, government and civic leadership groups, sharing her expertise in sustainability, economic redesign, green building, innovation and fair trade. Among the many achievements, Molly was recognized by the Yale Alumni Distinction Award in 2020 for exceptional contributions to global environmental and economic sustainability and the development of ethical supply chains. She delivered the opening plenary of the World Economic Summit Forum 2000 meeting in Davos, chaired the Swedish King Carl Gustav's Business Leadership in the Environment Symposium in 1996, and was named in the top 100 Women of Influence in 2014 by the Australian Financial Review. Molly served as the Executive Director on President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development at the White House from 1992 to 1996. Molly's topic today is about peace being the essential ingredient for sustainability and prosperity. Without further ado, I now present you with Molly Harris-Olsen. Thank you, Molly, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Will. It's such an honor to be here and celebrate the UN's International Day of Peace. Wouldn't it be a lovely world if every day was a day of peace? And it comes at such an extraordinary time. All of a sudden, we're considering nuclear submarines again. And we're like, where did that come from? You know, it's amazing how fast things are changing in the world today. So I'm really honored to be with you and delighted to share a few thoughts. I guess you know, whenever I think about peace, and I was raised a Quaker, so I have a deep connection to the Quaker principles. The key one being peace. I often think of Einstein's quote, which I'm sure somebody has said today, about peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. And I guess for me, having spent actually a large part of my life, probably the first 20 years of my working life, and I'd call it a calling, not so much a career, but I spent a lot of time studying biodiversity, coral reefs. Coral reefs are what brought me out here to Australia. And I really think that it's amazing to think how quickly the world is changing, but the environment that we're living in now is changing so fast with so many different things, you know, affecting us. Rapid urbanization, climate change is absolutely, you know, we're either going to solve it or we're going to make room for the next iteration of life on Earth. The demographic and social changes brought on by COVID, I mean, hasn't it been an extraordinary year and a half? But I guess for me, what's interesting about trade is that when we think about the future, you know, as if survival matters, and I again would say that, you know, life on Earth will probably go on without us if we fail to manage to hold on to humanity and life necessary to sustain it. But I do believe that without peace, there can be no justice. And I had an interesting, one of our colleagues, actually he's a very conservative former trade minister from the UK who happens to be the chair of the United Kingdom's Fair Trade Organization. So he's the chair of the board there, Lord Mark Price. he has a lovely quote that I think actually builds on what Einstein said so long ago, which is that trade actually builds trust, and trust actually helps to build peace, and peace builds prosperity. And I think it's really important to think of how these things are connected to each other, because in a world where, as Jeffrey Sachs said recently, I think his quote was that his neighborhood in New York has the same budget as the United Nations, and we wonder why the United Nations can't work effectively. It turns out that his neighborhood has a budget of around $3 billion a year. New York City has a budget of about 11 billion apparently, and that's US dollars. And the UN is around 3 billion apparently. So we wonder why our institutions are not keeping up. But we need to really build these institutions, and we need to build the understanding, because in a world where we keep coming back to things like, nuclear warheads or nuclear, technologies, it really does feel sometimes like it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. But what I think is also true right now, I do think that, of course, COVID has been a terrible thing for so many, and so many lives lost. It's really hard to get our mind around it. But the other side of that is that I think that all of the evidence is showing, and a lot of research now globally is showing, that people's understanding of the connectivity of the planet really is very different. And this is applicable to peace and everything else we're trying to do to achieve a sustainable world. So if we think about a new way of understanding our connectedness to the rest of the world and the consequences of our own actions, I think a lot of us who have been working on trade for a very long time as a mechanism towards fairness and alleviation of poverty and peace, we really do feel like, for the first time in a very long time, a world in which small producers and workers could enjoy secure and sustainable livelihoods is actually on the table. It's not quite within our grasp. I think that's a bit ambitious. Oh, you guys can't see my presentation, can you? Sorry, I'm going to just pause there.
You may share, you can share your presentation, Molly, if you like. You have, John, you have given Molly access to share her presentation.
Okay, sorry, my sincere apologies. I was assuming you could see that. So I will, I'll just jump ahead. There were a couple of slides you missed that were, but we'll just keep moving. My apologies for not noticing that you guys couldn't see the slides. Can you all see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So I think things really have changed, and there's a couple of other drivers that I think are also helpful for us to potentially be able to provide solutions to some of these really big global problems. The first of which is the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a moment, but it cannot be overstated, the profoundness of having a set of 17 goals and 67 specifically measurable targets that the whole world can strive towards, because it's common language, it's a common metric. We can tell if we're succeeding or not succeeding. I like to think about the world as either having consequences or no teeth at all. And in this case, the goals do really have quite significant teeth. They really are measurable. We also have the World Trade Organization is working hard towards trying to establish what they've got now, the Enhanced Integrated Framework, which is trying to address the unfairness in trade that still exists in the world. And of course, they've even recognized now what Oxfam and Fairtrade and many others recognized a long, long time ago, which is, in fact, for fair trade, it was 30 years ago, that actually fair trade is better than aid, because you actually can achieve so much more. There's a lovely actual true story of when why Fairtrade started, and that was because a charity in the Netherlands was giving some wells, installing some wells and some cooperatives, coffee cooperatives in Mexico, and the farmers said, "Thank you so much, we really appreciate these wells, but if you just paid a fair price for our coffee, we could actually buy the well ourselves." And there's something quite profound about that. They want to be able to control their own future. So the third thing that I would say, which is both frightening and helping us to drive realities in the world that help us potentially to achieve change, is the growing push to exterminate modern slavery. Of course, we thought we solved the problem of modern slavery 300 years ago, but it turns out that actually there's more modern slavery in the world today than there ever has been before, and 68% of it is here in our part of the world. So it is a really significant and serious challenge for us. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about fair trade, because I do believe, you know, I spent those 20 years doing environmental work. I led campaigns on the Rainbow Warrior, was a scientist on the Great Barrier Reef, and doing a lot of research on sea turtle biology and conservation, endangered species and the like in the Caribbean. But when I landed on the Fair Trade International board, I realized that actually the structure that fair trade has come up with and has been working on and scaling for the last 30 years is actually engineered for a sustainable and fair outcome. It's not just a nice set of voluntary standards, it's standards that have measurable metrics, they have consequences, and you can actually be removed from the fair trade system if you fail to meet those commitments, whether you're a farmer or a trader or a company. So it's a completely different set of rules that really do come up with an outcome that is around inclusive growth. The whole purpose of fair trade is to alleviate poverty. So I thought I would share with you some of the sort of key aspects of fair trade, because I think that it is extremely useful for us to understand. It is a globally scaled system. It has, I'll give you some more statistics in a minute, but it has producer networks, and those are producers in 75 countries all around the world. There are fair trade national offices in about 20 countries around the world, and fair trade products are sold in about 145 countries all around the world. Fair Trade International is responsible for the standards, and those are continuously improving set of standards. And the supply chains, which we're only starting to now understand, you know, we only have just recently understood that actually 14 million tons, metric tons, in fact, of plastic are actually in our oceans. That's by weight almost as much as fish. There's about $400 billion every year that is fast fashion going into rubbish bins in, or really the waste streams and the tips in the US alone. The US alone, that's only the US. And most of those items of clothing have only been worn once. So we have these ridiculous supply chains that now all of a sudden we're starting to understand just how wasteful and just how complicated they are, and just how little transparency they have. And actually, modern slavery, the reason it can thrive is because these supply chains have become so opaque. There's such a large depth of don't ask, don't tell. You know, you don't have visibility past the second tier. You don't know what's happening, and you can have plausible deniability for most of the value chain that you're responsible for. And in contrast to that, fair trade has had a totally voluntary, totally transparent supply chain that enables good governance and supporting the producers for environmental protection, climate change adaptation and mitigation, avoiding chemicals, really encouraging organics. And it enables those communities to be able to have substantial resources to take care of their own future. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But those supply chains that go right through to consumers, each part of it is transparent, each part of it is independently audited. And so what I would say about the structure of the system is that it really is engineered for different outcomes than our normal systems of commerce. And probably most profoundly, when I was chair of the Global Board of Fair Trade before being in this role, we actually passed constitutional changes that made all of the 1.8 million farmers and workers in the fair trade system half owners of the entire system of fair trade. So it's not a charitable act. They own a system that is structured differently to give them a fair go in trade. And that's a completely different way of creating what Einstein called understanding and enabling, we believe, a much more hopeful path to peace. So I guess I would explain fair trade as being a gentle way to shake the world. What fair trade is doing is quite profound, in fact, because it has demonstrated that an alternative trading system can scale globally. It can operate in so many countries. It can operate to measurable effects for the producers in the countries that are lucky enough to be able to have fair trade. But it is quite a gentle way, because in fact, it's not a revolution. We haven't, caused, I mean, there's lots of different ways to make change. And this one, I would say, is amongst the most subtle and in fact, a best kept secret in my view. So just to give you a little bit more of that world view about why this can have such an important impact on peace, is that not only I mentioned 1.8 million farmers in 75 countries, but the way fair trade is structured, it has a minimum price to protect the farmers to cover their costs of production. And in many, in fact, in the last 5 years for coffee, there have only been 3 weeks where the commodity price of coffee actually hit the minimum price that fair trade pays every day. So if you're not having that minimum price, then the farmers are very, very vulnerable. And then there's a premium that goes on top of the commodity price. And that has been about $871 million in the last 5 years. That money goes to the cooperatives for the community to make a decision about what their development needs are. And it enables them to then invest that money in a totally transparent and audited way into whatever they choose: schools, hospitals, potable water, whatever it is that they need. And it really enables them to be in control of their future, because they have the resources to make decisions about how their community is going to develop as a community. And that's not, that's not something that happens. There's lots of charity work that goes on. There's lots of money that goes pouring into these communities from development organizations, but very rarely do the communities have total control over the path that they're choosing to development. And as the UN pointed out a number of years ago, that is the most important ingredient for success in communities' development paths. So this sort of just gives you a little bit more information. There's about 35,000 products available. There are 7 major commodities where most of the poverty is, and that's where fair trade really does focus its efforts. And there are 1,822 producer organizations around the world today. So if we look at, I guess the only thing I'll point out on this picture, which just re-emphasizes some of those statistics, is that on average, fair trade has grown about 15% every year since it started 30 years ago. Now that has of course been disrupted by COVID, where most cafes have closed down. We're seeing really, really big challenges for some of our very committed licensees, but it has been a really consistent demonstration that there is an alternative path to poverty alleviation that does enable a stronger equity in the world. Just to look at this part of our region, and I'd have to say that we developed a really deep partnership with DFAT when actually Julie Bishop was the minister there. And I was fascinated because I asked her, why are you supporting this? What's your interest in it? And her greatest interest in it was actually the democracy building and the governance strengthening of communities that have to learn how, if they're going to spend that 871 million, they have to understand good auditing, they have to understand good governance in decision making. And fair trade is out there right behind them, auditing every step of the way, so we know exactly what's happening. And she felt that that was a really great thing for the region, to be building strong democracy knowledge, and that was important for communities right throughout not only our neighborhood, but the world. So if we think about modern slavery, that's an extremely telling fact about the whole structure of our commerce and how we have designed it. And I would say that from fair trade's point of view, connecting peace and prosperity and understanding means that it is really time. I think Jeffrey Sachs also, to quote him recently, he said it at the World Food Security pre-meeting recently. He said, we have a system, we know we have a system, and it's broken, and we know that it's not working. So again, it's interesting that right now with modern slavery, we really are starting to, I think, understand more deeply why a structure that's engineered like fair trade for a different outcome is so important, both for the transparency and the poverty alleviation points of view. But only about 16% of the world's farmers and workers are actually part of the fair trade system. So we have a long way to go before this opportunity is available to the most marginalized farmers and workers in the world. And globally, the retail sales are around 15 billion US dollars a year. In this part of the world, it's only about 327 million a year in premiums. And just a couple more thoughts on why this matters today. And that is that, again, partly because of COVID, we've really seen this increase in conscious consumerism. And some really interesting studies recently showed that 3 in 5 Australians agree that Australia has a responsibility to support our region and global neighbors to overcome poverty and disasters. That, of course, is one of the first steps to trying to have a peaceful region. And we know that we're having some struggles with that at the moment. 56% of Australians believe that it's important for people to consider how their purchases impact people overseas. Now, we're blissfully ignorant in many ways of what's happening in other parts of the world, or we have been until now. But it's really interesting to see how people's perceptions are changing. 72% of consumers think that companies are behaving unsustainably. They don't trust companies. Unilever's sustainable brands actually showed growth of 78% in 2019, such is the trust of sustainability in consumers and its growth. And 51% of consumers want brands to do more to be eco-friendly and sustainable. So I think we really are, hopefully, and those of us that have been through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and have seen these swings and roundabouts a few times, I can only say that this is the first time. When I was running President Clinton's Council on Sustainability at the White House, we had no principles of sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goals didn't exist. The GRI didn't exist. None of these frameworks existed or were demonstrated to be able to change outcomes. And I think with the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is really my last key message, we really do have a world where we can all measure and hold each other to account for all of us and the way that we are impacting the world for good or for negative impacts on sustainability and peace. So fair trade, of course, everything fair trade does is measurable. We map ourselves across the Sustainable Development Goals comprehensively, but there are 8 goals that are particularly important to fair trade's ability to achieve goals. And I'll skip to just showing that when we map fair trade's outputs per commodity, per country, all these measurable standards that are the underpinnings of that engineered system, we can actually tell you specifically that 17% of the premium that is invested by fair trade communities in their own development is actually going toward no poverty. 57% is going towards no hunger, zero hunger. And we've mapped the others to sustainable production, consumption, all of these that are particularly relevant, gender, education. And you can actually look at the outcomes across fair trade's measurable standards in each specific location, and you can tell how they are or are not achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and where they're succeeding is particularly important. So I would say that we need just this kind of measuring stick to help the world to actually achieve these goals. And I guess fundamental to that, and this is my last message for you, is that there really can also not be any peace or justice unless there is climate justice. We have a situation now where in the fair trade system, climate change in the 75 countries where we have producers, we've just recently done a new 5-year strategy to 2025, and in every single country they said, climate change, climate change, climate change. It is hitting us now. It is impacting our ability to grow our crops. It's impacting our viability as farmers. And if we don't see some support for climate justice, then we are going to have a much more difficult situation in terms of food in the world and the poverty that is the consequence of it. So I guess what I'd really like to end with is just to say that I do believe that peace is the essential ingredient for the world to be sustainable. And I do believe that trust through really sustainable trade that is transparent and does respect the fact that we have a extremely unequal world. Recently, I was really enamored with this recent talk of Jeffries, but he said, he made the comment that the 3 of our biggest billionaires have gone into space. He said, maybe since they're not paying taxes, they could stay there and leave the rest of their resources behind to address the world's problems. I think we don't need people to go into space. We need to look after the home that we have, and we do need to make sure that we are able to support a fair and equitable world, because we do know that until it is until there is some better equality in the world, and there's trade justice and climate justice, we will have a very, very difficult time having a peaceful world. But we do hope that that is achievable in at least our children's lifetime. And I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to hopefully some discussion. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Molly. Please put your hands together for Molly, and thank you for a very insightful presentation. We have a question for you here, Molly, and I'll get straight into it from one of our ambassadors for peace, who says, how can we have fair trade when small producers or developing world are generally price takers, hardly being price makers within global markets? Likewise, the currencies.
Sorry, go ahead.
Likewise, the currencies in which the prices are presented in their weights of the external values of the powered global players. Happy to hear your comments.
So it's precisely, thank you, that's a very good question. And it's precisely for that reason that farmers are very vulnerable, especially, you know, the small farmers of the world that are the main membership. 80% of fair trades members are small farmers, less than an acre of land. And that means they don't have power in the commodity supply chain. So when I said coffee for 5 years has not paid the minimum price except for 3 weeks in 5 years, that means any farmer who's not in the fair trade system getting a fair trade term of trade, which is with that minimum price and the premium, if they're not in the fair trade system, then they are getting absolutely nailed to the wall. And in fact, they're subsidizing our coffee every day. An average cup of coffee, 7 cents of it goes to the farmer. The rest of it goes to the rest of that value chain. So that's exactly the problem. And that's why fair trade developed this minimum price, which sets a price that is well above typically the price that the commodity market sets. If the commodity does go above the minimum price, of course, the farmer gets that higher price. But then on top of that is this extra 10 to 15%, which is a premium for that community development fund. All of that is paid for by the companies who are investing in these fair trade supply chains. So what we have done, and as I mentioned, the fair trade farmers and workers in the system that we govern are half of the global board, half of the General Assembly. They are literally half owners of this $15 billion annual global system of retail sales. So every decision we make on strategy, on resources, on risks, they are in the driver's seat making those decisions. What that does is it gives them power in these supply chains that they never had in any other system. And even today, they don't have in any other system or certification or structure that we're aware of. So you're exactly right. That is profoundly the problem. They have no power. They have no voice. They are price takers, except in the system of fair trade, which is why it's so important that consumers know the difference, that they know that there is an alternative. It is more expensive than slavery. It is more expensive than a lot of the tick the box exercises that are out there, even if they're well-intentioned, but it does make a dramatic difference to the lives of farmers. So good question.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you, Apollo, for this great question. Another question I have here is how can we teach foundations that work with different communities to promote a fair trade mindset?
Another great question. Look, it's so fascinating, but the way fair trade functions, this $871 million is a phenomenal, gigantic carrot. And there are so many places where fair trade works, where the normative relationships are competitive or even quite adversarial. So we work in places in Papua New Guinea where we have cooperatives that are working hand in glove with each other now. They were always warring. They were always across the path, with their spears, literally just, at each other, any opportunity. And now they have a really good reason to work together. And that reason to work together is far more profound in terms of its outcome and its benefits than the squabbles that they used to engage in, which of course weren't very helpful. This is true across many boundaries, across Palestine, across, it's amazing the communities that work together in fair trade that from a global perspective are absolutely at odds with each other. So I would say that there is nothing quite like a profound opportunity for a community to actually get something real, education for their kids, potable water, a road that helps them get their commodity out to market. These things are so fundamental that we take them for granted every day. But when communities can work together, it's amazing how you can create that sort of collaborative working environment and the peace that is therefore built in that understanding.
Oh, thank you. I believe we have one more question from Mimi. Mimi, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes. Well, I really was very much interested in your speech, but as you started by saying trust, build peace, and place countries in stability, what, in your opinion, we are paying for the consequences of our actions? What is going to happen when Australia cancels the contract with France without any discussion and move to a new pact with other countries? And the loss of money that has been due to that, we are losing billions, plus what we are having politically, the position now of Australia versus France and European Union in general. How could you really say that? Stability way.
Yes, look, I really am quite shocked to see, I did have 5, maybe 6 years in the White House, watching up close and personal just how challenging policy is, but I've just never seen anything like we've seen since the Trump era. And it's almost as if, somehow heads of state seem to have reached a rock bottom where they seem to think that, anything is up for grabs and that integrity doesn't really matter. I think it's just extraordinary what Australia has done. I've come to expect that. And I think that the consequence of failing to be a good international citizen, and in the US case, the whole Afghan war, everything that has unfolded since then, I think it has permanently cost the US their moral authority. I think that it's going to be very, very difficult for the United States ever to play any kind of real leadership part again. Now, they don't seem to get that yet, but you look at the British powers and where they were at one point in the world, and they're not there anymore. I think the US is exactly going to follow that path. My hope was that Australia and New Zealand might jump into that leadership role, but that's certainly not happening at the moment. No. All I can say about a turn of events like has happened in the last 48 hours with France is I just can't imagine France trusting Australia again, in the generation that is going to be in power for the next, however many years. And I do think it is very costly for, one of the things that I love about Australia, and I have moved here permanently. My children were both born here. My husband was Australian. I just think that we have this beneficial position where we can bat way above our weight because we understand the world differently. We understand China. We used to understand China differently. And we can bring a different kind of dialogue into these international forums in a way that the whole rest of the world benefits from. And they see Australia and New Zealand as pivotal in bringing those more open voices that are more constructive in the world. I think that, you know, it's a delicate balance, and I do not think we've done Australia's credibility any benefits with this latest about face.
Thank you for your reply. Can't reply. It's really shocking to me what is happening these days politically.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Really surprising.
Thank you. Molly, I have a quick question. We have COP26, which was happening in November. What do you expect the outcomes of that conference will be?
Well, I think we have a really clear path with the Paris Agreement to strive to achieve net zero. I think there is a lot of noise in the world right now and a lot of what I would call cowboy behavior. In fact, when Microsoft tried to offset all of its carbon going back to the 70s, which was an incredibly admirable commitment to make, their analysis was that the carbon markets are in quite a disheveled state, and that we're going to have to improve those quite significantly if we're going to actually be able to draw down the volumes of carbon necessary to retain life as we know it on Earth. I do think that Glasgow, there's a lot of enthusiasm about Glasgow. Australia is not participating meaningfully in solutions when it comes to Glasgow, which is, again, so sad and disappointing. But much of the rest of the world is. And while I don't believe that businesses alone can solve our climate crisis, there are many that are, like Unilever, very serious about their ability to contribute constructively to that net zero. And many of them are looking for the most credible ways of doing that in the global trading system and supporting the systems that do give us that opportunity. So I would say watch this space. I think we're way short at the moment from the financial commitments necessary to actually achieve the Paris agreements. But we have a little, at least we have really clear targets, and we do have clear commitments. And I'm hopeful that as we see more floods in Japan and Germany, more heat waves on the West Coast and fires in Australia, that people really will just realize this is actually the do or die moment. And if we want to survive and our future generations to survive and thrive on the planet, we will have to take this bull by the horns. And it's not, it really isn't that big a challenge. When you look at literally the $1 trillion of global economy and the $1 trillion that are in the hands of only about 27 people, you actually could solve these problems really quickly and really easily. It's like UNDP used to have a wonderful quote about you could feed, house, clothe, provide education, healthcare, family planning, for every person on the planet, and that's about what the U.S. spends on pet food and perfume. We still are kind of at that point where really these problems are within our grasp, but it does mean we have to become truly global citizens. Hopefully COVID has helped push us in that direction, and hopefully we will all be able to hold our government to account to be participating constructively in that.
Well, thank you very much. Can you please all put your hands together for Molly Harris-Olsen for an amazing presentation today.
It's a pleasure, a real pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to now present our next speaker, who has a passion for spiritual direction. And today, I would like to introduce Linda Young. Linda Young, who has a Bachelor of Teaching, Bachelor of Education, Bachelor of Theology, a graduate diploma in supervision and Master of Arts in spiritual supervision and in spiritual direction. Linda has served as a minister for the past 18 years, and as I mentioned, she has particular passion for spiritual direction as well as music, and has authored a children's music book and co-authored books on spirituality. Linda today will be talking to us about Centering Journey to Inner Peace, an unprecedented opportunity. Linda, thank you for being with us, and please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. It's just been an honour to be part of this community, part of this presentation today. And yeah, part of my practice is that when we are feeling emotions and feeling moved by things, that we just take that moment and really breathe in the sensation of those feelings that we're feeling. So can I just invite all of us just to take a moment to just be still and quiet and grateful, just to take in that deep breath of gratitude for all that we've heard today and all of the amazing things that are happening in our world towards peace. I'm a Christian minister, a primary school teacher. I love art, and I'm actually in a doctorate program at the moment, which is going to be looking at art as one of the means in which we can help to find the differences in, particularly in our own problems, but absolutely on a broader level too. And you know, I believe that there's a lot that can be expressed through art and through spirituality that moves away from the heady stuff of trying to work things out on a purely intellectual level. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but also tapping into our heart space. Art is certainly one way that people can produce things that speak to other people. Doesn't even matter if they have the same language or not. We'll speak to them in the way that they need to be spoken to for that time. And could be a totally different message from one person to the other. But in some way, there's a spiritual connection in which art speaks to us straight to our hearts. So spiritual direction is an ancient practice, mainly from the Christian mystics, of being still, being quiet, being present, helping those voices that come to us from the past lay low, because as it's a very well-known saying at the moment that, you know, we spend most of our times either thinking about the past, dwelling on things of the past, or projecting into the future and what we want the future to look like. Again, nothing wrong with either of those things, but we tend to miss out on the present and tend to forget to be grateful for where we are and who we are right at this moment and the things that are in our present place at this moment. Oh, I'm quite overwhelmed by this session today. I must say that each speaker has just really touched my heart and touched my spirit. And, you know, I hope and I'm sure that many of you are feeling that too from this presentation, that, you know, we can look at our news and be totally mortified by what seems to be happening out in our world, but things like the gathering of like-minded people coming together as we are doing now really brings that hope and that sense that there is so much good out there to be had and so much work to be done. So just going back to the spiritual direction practices, some of the very useful things that can happen in spiritual direction is actually to spend time in silence. The longest I have ever done that has been 7 days. Quite a challenge because the voices in our head take about a day and a half to start being quiet. It's like they gush, all the thoughts, all those things that you've been shoving down in yourself things from your childhood, things, injustices that you've had, mistakes that you've made, all seem to just over the period of a few days bubble up into your conscious mind and actually give you time to process them. And then by about halfway through day two and going on, inner peace that is just so overwhelming comes. And those voices just quieten. And it's just one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, really. Those voices that we have tend to dominate our minds, and, you know, we often find sleeping even at night can be hard because you wake up in the middle of the night with those voices chattering at you with things that you could have done differently, things that you need to do, things that you could have said that you didn't. So taking the time to actually spend some time in silence and not talking and not doing anything other than the inner work is just an amazing practice. Listening and contemplative listening is another major practice of spiritual direction. Our tendency as human beings is to, in conversation, listen a bit to what someone else is saying and then go off in our own track about how it's affected us or what we're going to say to add to the conversation of whoever's speaking to us. But the gift of contemplative listening is to just truly listen and just listen to the words and just really feel the heart space of the person speaking and allowing space between their words and your words back to them. And so a spiritual direction session, a formal one, takes about an hour, where you have a spiritual director who is contemplative listening to you and prayerfully listening, prayerfully praying for you at the same time. And I think for me, that was one of the first times in my life that I ever truly felt listened to. The first session that I had, when I went with to a spiritual director before I started doing the training myself, I had an experience where I'd had this dream about my father who'd passed away 13 years ago, and I brought the dream to the session, and it was very vivid. It was me on stage speaking, getting ready to speak, not being able to find my notes. That's a speaker's nightmare, really. And in my dream, I was in an auditorium and there were a lot of chairs. It was before people had come, but, you know, I was panicking because I couldn't find my notes. And then right up the very top corner of the auditorium, I saw my father. And he'd been dead for 13 years, you know. So I saw him and I jumped down off the stage in my dream, and I jumped over the chairs, over the chairs, over the chairs, and got to him. And I said to him, "Do you know who I am?" And he said to me, "You look a bit familiar." And I took this to my spiritual director and it sort of thought of it as just a crazy dream. And she sat forward on her chair and she said, "Linda, you jumped off the stage." I said, "Yeah." She said, "You jumped over the chairs to get to your father." I said, "Yes." "And you met your father?" I said, "Yes." And like I was in tears by this stage, and really she just listened to my own story, my own dream, and brought it back to me in a way that was just so powerful, and helped me to acknowledge that even 13 years later, you know, there was still part of me deeply missing my dad, and that, you know, some might believe that he was even visiting me in that dream, which is something I like to think of as a soothing thought for myself. Even just talking about it's reliving it at this moment. So yeah, so I did a 2-year course doing the spiritual direction practice through Wellspring in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. and have been practicing now since, I think it's 2006. Yeah, so getting close to 15 years of spiritual direction practice. But it's certainly informed my life, as well as, you know, being able to sit with people in their journeys now. I believe deeply that the practices of spiritual direction have enhanced my life and brought a deep peace that I did not experience before, even though being brought up in a faith family and, you know, having an understanding of God and the scriptures and everything, which I love. There's just something about this practice that was just so deeply connective for me. So happy to take any questions if there are any questions there.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing your journey and your dreams with us. Please give a hand to Linda. We're going to leave the questions till the end on this occasion, please, Linda, as we need to move on because we're short of time. I'm going to now move on to our next speaker. And our next speaker, Dr. Shahid Yamin, is the Executive Chairman and Co-founder of Global Opportunities Commercialization, which he has developed the concept of Smart Institute for developing appropriate technology-based entrepreneurs in poorer regions of the world. The GOC executive team strongly believe that social and economic empowerment are the drivers of peace in the world community. Self-help raises the self-esteem of individuals, which then become a creative asset of the community. It gives humanity a purpose to live and grow. Dr. Shahid's career spans over 40 years in multiple countries, and he has diverse experience in academia, industry, in consulting in Australia, Southeast Asia, Europe, South Asia, Middle East, and EMENA region. He is also an ambassador for peace with the UPF. Now, please, his topic today is going to be the role of multifaceted variables in universal peace. So please put your hand together for Dr. Shahid, and please go ahead.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It has been true pleasure to hear so many illuminating speakers talking about peace and about how peace can be gained. So I thank all of them for their contribution, and I also thank the audience for being there, like-minded audience to discuss on this topic. My topic for today is the role of multifaceted variables in universal peace. I chose this topic for three main reasons. First one is I see peace to be a part of a bigger equation of multifaceted variables, each of which interact in different ways. Because peace is not just absence of war. Peace is about so many factors which actually brings inner peace as well as external peace, peace of the environment, and so on and so forth. I also believe that peace is a mindset. It's the way we think, which needs to be consciously promoted among humanity for all strata of life. So it doesn't matter where they come from, what status of economic, what is their economic status, social status, etc. I believe that it is a mindset. And mindset means that peace has to become part of the unconscious mind. It's not the conscious mind only. Peace has to become part of the unconscious mind, which tends to control behavior and so on and so forth. Any social change can only happen, and peace is a social change, peace is a way of thinking as a social change. It can only happen when we take concurrent action in all the dimension of that problem. Social change does not come in incremental actions. And this is a key point that needs to be noted, that not only my research, but subsequent research has shown that innovation does not happen on incremental basis. Incremental innovation does not produce results, sustainable and substantial results. It is concurrent actions that produces results. So I would like to share the screen, if I may, and I would like to present
yes, sure.
All right, Dr. Shahid, I will make you co-host right now. I made you co-host, Dr. Shahid, and you may share with us your presentation.
Can everybody see the slide?
No.
No.
Oh.
Dr. Shahid, you should have a green button at the bottom of the screen that says share screen at the bottom of the interface, and you should be able to click on that and then select the particular presentation that you want.
That's what I did.
If you're happy to email it to me, and I can share it for you.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, can you do that? You got my email address?
Or you can share it, you can send it to me, Dr. Shahid.
Okay.
Yeah.
And look, if you want, you can continue your talk.
Yeah, I can continue my talk without the slides, and I'll send it to you as soon as I finish my talk.
Okay? Sure.
Sounds good.
So in the first slide, I've tried to pick out 4 critical elements, which I will go one by one, which is poverty, arms race as a deterrent to peace, political thinking in terms of political thinking in terms of global politics of war, which is what is happening. We have all seen in recent times, and also global climate change. So these are the 4 factors which I believe has got the most impact on creating peace and in creating a world of peace. When we talk about poverty, firstly, peace is not absence of war. I think it has been mentioned in peace literature very clearly that peace is not just absence of war, because peace is actually formation of harmony, human justice, equity, and things like that. That is what actually creates peace. It is not that if we don't have war for a year, we are in peaceful environment. Persistent and continuously growing poverty cannot promote peace. It is impossible to have a peaceful world where there are over 3 billion people who are in abject poverty. And I myself have lived abject poverty when I was young. I have lived 12 years of abject poverty, although I did not suffer as much as my parents perhaps have suffered, because they were working 3 jobs and things like that to support me. And they were working very, very hard to find nutritious food for me, etc., etc., etc. Nevertheless, I have witnessed poverty firsthand for the first 12 years of my life. And what I am today is because of the different mindset of my parents regarding their poverty status. They did not believe that poverty is their weakness. They believe poverty is their strength. And their strength comes from the drive that they want to change the conditions. So one of the things that is lacking in poverty alleviation is there is lot of focus on extreme poverty. And even Nobel laureate of 2020 said that actually food is not a part of poverty. Food shortage is not part of poverty. He has lived with poor people and did research, qualitative research, by living with them, etc., etc. His argument is that food is only one small element of it, because if your tummy is full, it doesn't make you, do things which will alleviate poverty. It's the next time you are still looking for food. In Pakistan, there is hardly any real hunger, but there are a lot of beggars. And begging is a business in its own right. Not a legal business, but there is a mafia business, which creates human slavery, which creates most of the begging income goes to the mafia that coordinates that. Young girls who go on the streets to beg, when they become teenagers, they get raped, etc., etc., etc. They get abused, and so on and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make here is that just by focusing on extreme poverty, which is essentially focused on having enough subsistence, is not a solution to alleviate poverty. I'm not saying it is not important. I'm saying it is not a solution, because every family, if you go on the streets of Karachi, you find beggars with 6 to 8 children, 1.5 year difference, 2 year difference, roaming around with them. There are 7 generations roaming around with them. And it is the poverty alleviation will only happen when we start to change the welfare of the generations. Just by changing the welfare of the parents, poverty alleviation will not happen. The second slide is about global arms race and also trade wars, which Molly has very nicely brought out in her presentation. And it was her organization is really, I don't know why it is growing 15%. I would say it should grow 150%, because this is a dire need for the world. So global arms trade and global arms race is increasing. I recently read that, in Texas, they want to make owning ammunition or guns without a license. They want to pass a legislation where any Tom, Dick, and Harry can buy a gun. It is the mindset of that which is creating, actually, when you make all sorts of weapons, technological, biological, there has to be some testing to be done. And wars like the recent wars that has happened in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, where countries have been devastated, population has been devastated, and yet all sorts of arms and ammunition have been used in order, in the name of peace, in order to it's a legally sanctioned terrorism, which is made in order to make peace. My third point is global politics of war and peace. The thing is, as I said earlier, that the mindset of peace is important, but here the mindset of peace is through wars. Every time there is, we talk about peace, they take sides and they create wars. Breach of international obligation. Iraq war happened without actually international approval. Politics of interference. Imagine if a small community has interference from your neighbors. Everything has to be done according to a certain standard, etc., 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 and so on. Politics of isms. For at least more than 100, 150 years, we have been talking about isms, the different way the governments are structured, the different ways the governments are funding their people, their welfare, etc., etc., etc. I, for one, as an intellectual, cannot understand why that is so important, that every country should be a capitalist country. Why is it so important that every country should, no country should be a communist country, etc., etc.? The fact is that this is a system which obviously people are used to in that particular country. And this war of ism has not gone away at the end of the Cold War. It still exists. There is a differential global value system. There is no uniformity on, I mean, even human rights is actually differentially thought about, even though there is a human rights charter. So it is important that if we want to really make peace happen, then we need to create an evolution of a revolution, a peaceful revolution, but an evolution of a revolution to create peace. We make peace as a fundamental part of our mindset. Global climate change, I mean, in spite of all scientific evidence, the political leadership and commercial leadership does not, universal political and commercial leadership does not have the will to accept and find innovative ways, cost-effective innovative ways to create an environment without pollution. It is possible. As a young engineer, I was working in Pakistan, and I tell you that like one example of how it is possible. And we were working in villages, particularly dairy villages where there were a lot of cows and so on and so forth. What we did was we collected all the cow dung. With the help of the villagers, we collected all the cow dung, we processed it. We created from one furnace, we could give pollution-free fuel for cooking foods to 20 families. We used to which has got multitude of benefits. It gives much better health to the woman. It gives, there are less chances of disabilities because they are not actually inhaling CO2, etc., etc. And the waste product of this process was the highly nitrogenized fertilizer. So it's zero waste. It creates multiple benefits by providing gas for cooking. At the same time, it is very, very cheap to do it. We can extend those sort of ideas into a bigger scale. I am sure that if commercial industries are really interested in making the change in terms of climate change, then it is feasible and possible that we can find very simple solutions to it, and that will create a world which is a lot better off. Yesterday, I was reading an article where garbage, the garbage dump that landfilling that we have, they use that garbage to produce a certain type of oil, which is then fed into the ground in order to provide CO2 to the ground, which apparently fertilizes the ground better. So there are many, many ways in order to change the society. And what my final slide is about making some conclusion. I think we need, and I hope that pandemic has made us realize to have a reformation of our political and social value system as a whole world. I believe that peace mindset needs to be developed, but it has to be developed from bottom up to top down at the same time, so that there is a force which takes peace forward. And UPF is doing a great job at the top level, and it is also doing great job in medium level. But there has to be a momentum on both sides in order to actually consolidate peace as a mindset. Peace can never be won by war. This is the mindset that has to change. Peace requires tolerance, understanding, respect, and love for humanity, and a radical transformation in political thinking and values, which is very, very important. Because I think at this point in time, I mean, recent examples of nuclear submarines is a case in point. At this point in time, all we can see is that the more we spend on the defense, the more safe we will be. And the answer is no. Because fact is, technology has gone so far. We have got biotechnology, we have got drones which do not have the feelings of the pilot when they throw the bombs into a community and so on and so forth. Pilot may have that human feeling and say, maybe I would like not to kill innocent men and women. Drones doesn't have that. So these are the sort of critical issues that I believe the universal peace, which is still a long way off to get universal peace in the world for our generations and our future generations and their future generations. We need universal peace as a means to do that. UPF and many other organizations are doing fantastic work, but I think there is a need to take a lot more ground level actions, which can start to aggregate and create more momentum towards peace development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shahid. And given that we are running late, I have to apologise that we won't be taking any further questions. So if you do have any questions, my apologies to Linda and Dr. Shahid. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can pass them on, and or email them to us and we can pass them on to Linda and Dr. Shahid. So thank you again. Well, now I would like to pass it back to either Daniel and John for their final remarks.
Okay, thank you. Look, please stay around and chat. We are definitely over time, but we can hang around with each other a little bit. That's okay. So look, thank you very, very much. I'm interested to talk with you folks, and I think Richard wanted to ask a question, and we're really among friends here and ambassadors for peace. So look, Universal Peace Federation has done a great job at one thing, and that is bring thousands and thousands of people as peace ambassadors on a global level. Look, there are three core values, universal values: interdependence and mutual prosperity. I have to say, Molly and Shahid and our professor, the professor started off by saying, look, there's a real issue with willingness in terms of values. We started our journey there. We then went to Molly, who showed us how interdependent we are and how our prosperity is, our mutual prosperity, how it is critical. And we finished with Linda, who talked about that sense of peace and universal values within ourselves. And then finally with Dr. Shahid, who talked about the right mindset and where we are. And which leaves me with the conclusion of the three other pillars of our organization, and that is peace within ourselves. And that's not a warm and fuzzy concept, folks. It really isn't just an idea, because if I'm not at peace with myself, I will definitely cause problems. I can tell you I've done that, and I know it, and I know why. Because I was not at peace with myself. When I am, I will be able to generate that peace. But the other one is a relationship with others, a peace with others, and finally with our environment, which Molly talked about. We all know we're at a crisis point. And so, you know, these core values sustain us, and they're critical at this time. And I have to say, I come back always to our motto, and that is living for the sake of others. Again, this is not just a nice little slogan, but it is a reality of how I live my life. I'm not saying I do it all the time, but it's a reality of how we go about doing business. If I'm living for the sake of others, then I'm going to go to the supermarket and I'm going to buy free trade products because it might cost me a bit more, but I'm conscious that I'm living for the sake of others. I live in a consciously as a peace builder in my relationship to others and how I work and so on. I mean, I work in education, and education, people talk about values and they set up policies. But when you look at how people behave, you question to yourself, well, it's nice to have a policy, but you've got to change, you've got to make that policy part of your heart, part of who you are. And that's a big problem. I always ask leaders, what's the biggest problem in your organization? And they say it's people problems. So in other words, we have to change. I mean, a lot of energy is invested in policy, but we have to change ourselves. I'll stop there. And I still think I'd like to take it from here, Will, and just open it up for people who want to hang around.